most people have heard of the Dybbuk, right? That I said, if there is an evil spirit like the Dybbuk, is there also a good spirit? And guess what? There is, the Ebor. What it is, it's a Jewish person gets killed before he can complete a task of great benefit to the Jewish people. His neshama, his soul, can travel into the body of another person so he's able to complete this task.
This is the Book of Life. I'm Heidi Rabinowitz. Eva Wiseman's newest Jewish book for young people is Another Me, a historical/paranormal romance novel. The Book of Life's Canadian correspondent, Anne Dublin, spoke to Eva by Skype at her home in Winnipeg. Anne is an author of Jewish Kidlit as well, including her latest, 44 Hours or Strike, winner of the Canadian Jewish Book Award. Be sure to check the show notes at bookoflifepodcast.com for links to more info about both Eva and Anne.
Eva Wiseman is the author of a number of outstanding historical novels. She came to Canada from Hungary with her family when she was a girl. She began writing at a young age, and her novels have been nominated for or have won numerous awards. They stress Jewish themes and characters, the Inquisition in 15th century Spain, the blood libel accusations in the 19th century, and the Holocaust in 20th century Europe. Eva's latest historical novel is called Another Me, published by Penguin Random House. I interviewed Eva Wiseman via Skype at her home in Winnipeg, Canada. Eva, welcome to the Book of Life podcast.
Well, thank you for having me, Anne.
It's my pleasure. I'd like to begin by asking you some general questions about yourself and your writing. Firstly, what were you like as a young reader?
I was a voracious reader. I read absolutely everything from classics to science fiction. There was just something about the written word that attracted me. You know, when you read, you get transported into another world, and I think that appealed to me. The world of the imagination.
And I understand that you came to Canada with your family after the Hungarian Revolution. Can you tell us how your early childhood experiences influenced your writing?
Well, that's an easy question. My first book, A Placement at Home, is really a fictionalized retelling of our escaping from Hungary during the revolution and coming to Canada and, my adjustment to life here. And quite frankly, I had quite a tough time. We were the first wave of refugees to come to Canada, and socially it was very difficult. But time passed and you adjust. I used to tell my kids stories about what it was like to come here. My kids like my stories, and A Placement at Home, my first book, was the result. I have to tell you, I have a journalistic background, so writing was not something brand new to me at the time, but it was certainly a different path I took.
Yes, I understand. And of course, in those days, being a refugee to Canada was quite different than being one now. I know that there were very few supports from the government or other agencies to help refugees adjust.
Yes, basically the help we received was from the Joint, the International Jewish Agency. They gave us iron beds and blankets that were really very, very rough. And I still remember how quickly the blanket was. And everything was new. Even worse, though, to school, I was always a very sociable, outgoing child. And then suddenly I was surrounded by kids who were dressed differently. The kids in Canada, for example, their skirts were longer, while in Europe, kids our age wore shorter skirts. So all these things don't seem important. But when you appear in school looking totally different from other kids and you cannot speak the language, you have a tough time. And I've never forgotten that. Yeah, I was very fortunate, though, because my family was always very close and very supportive. And because of that, I was able to adjust and come to love this country, which I love with all my heart.
But Eva, it occurs to me that those experiences that you went through as a refugee and feeling like an outsider must influence your writing, because in many of your books you do talk about characters who are the outsiders, don't you?
Yes, I do. There's no doubt about that. I think when you undergo an experience like that, you have the after effects all of your life. It kind of marks you all your life. I think you become also an observer to see how things are going on around you. You want to fit in and you don't quite know how, so you kind of get to be more analytical. You know, it was quite a tough experience for a kid, and I'm very glad that things aren't like that anymore, that being an immigrant and a refugee is no longer so unusual. Now we have more guidelines and more help on how to behave towards newcomers. But yes, I think in many ways, having been an outsider, I think it helped my writing. I know this sounds sad to say that, but it does, because you don't have too many friends. Your imagination is woken, and you sort of live in your own imaginary world to some degree. When you were asking me about what I was reading, and I say to you science fiction, I was thinking to myself, maybe because it got me away from reality. I don't know, because I never read sci-fi now.
Mm-hmm. I used to like sci-fi when I was a kid too. I even read comic books like Superman or Batman. So I think
that's how I learned English. The comics, the sci-fi comics.
That's a wonderful way, I think. So Eva, let's talk a bit more about your writing. I notice in your books that you take a lot of care in choosing the names of your characters. Can you explain how you choose those names? Are they based on the way they sound? Do they have a special meaning for you, or is there something else?
I have to confess, the easiest part of my answer is, if I have a character who's really a noble character, a good character, I tend to name them after a member of the family. For instance, in Another Me, Natan is a European version of Nathan. My husband's name is Nathan. And I also try to choose characters that are easy for North American readers to read. For example, in my second book, My Canary Yellow Star, the main character's name is Martha. Now, Martha is Martha, right? So when you have your readers reading your book, you don't want them to have to stumble over the name every time. Yet you want the name to be authentic to the time, something that was used during the times you're writing about. So it's a bit of a challenge, but it's kind of fun to do it too. I have to tell you, if I have an evil character, I never, ever name it after someone I know.
I think that's very wise. Yeah. Well, I do find that the names of your characters are appropriate and suitable to their personality, let's say. It's very interesting to me because I do the same thing. My main characters in my books, I enjoy naming them after members of my family, the good ones, the good characters.
Yes, I think it's common with writers.
All right. So, Eva, is there a certain type of scene that's harder for you to write than other scenes? Maybe a love scene or a scene filled with action. Do you find certain scenes more difficult or more easy to write?
You know, you're very astute in your questions, Anne. In Another Me, I call it a paranormal romance. And we're also writing for kids. And I know that young adult nowadays is often quite, what's the word I'm searching, is quite frank in descriptions for love scenes, etc. And I find I just somehow don't write those scenes. So even though Another Me is a love story, there were certain boundaries I couldn't pass. I felt that I can show the feeling with the young people, the passion they have towards each other in the book, without having to do that. So I think for me, love scenes, and you don't want to be also too harlequin romantic either, I feel that love scenes for me are the most difficult. Interesting question.
It's an interesting answer. I myself think that a love scene is more effective if you leave parts to the reader's imagination. And your love scenes, I find, are very effective and very moving. I have to tell you that. Eva, one last general question before we get to Another Me. You've written many historical books on Jewish themes. Some of the titles are The Last Song, Puppet, and A Place Not Home. What drives you to write these books on these themes?
You know, that's another interesting question. I actually thought about that because I'm not an observant Jew. I go to synagogue for the high holidays. Yet when I write, my passion to write is aroused by the Jewish themes. When I was growing up, both of my parents were survivors of Auschwitz.
Yes.
And my mother used to tell us about her experiences when she was a young woman in Auschwitz. She had her 19th birthday in Auschwitz. My father never talked about it till he got much older, and then he didn't stop talking about it. And at the time, I didn't want to hear the stories. I never told my mother that, but, you know, nobody wanted to hear stories about how their parents were brutalized and terribly treated and degraded. But I grew up with those stories. Auschwitz was my reality. The Holocaust was my reality. So when I started writing, I wanted to write about the Holocaust. And my Canary Yellow Star was about how Wallenberg saved the Jews of Budapest, many of them, about 100,000, some people say. And Canada was based upon my parents' experiences in Auschwitz. And no one must know about how the Holocaust affected the generation after, the second generation. And these books sort of just led to the other Jewish themes. For some reason, those are the topics that excite me. And to be an effective writer, you have to write about topics that excite you.
Of course you do, because the writing process, the research takes so long that passion has to carry you through the whole long time it takes, emotionally, physically, mentally, all of those, Eva. I understand.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%.
So, Eva, let's move now to your latest novel, Another Me. I should tell our listeners that it will be out in autumn 2016.
September 13.
Good, perfect. So Another Me is a historical novel. It's set in 14th century Strasbourg, France. Why did you choose this particular time and place as the setting for your novel?
I was doing some reading about how terrible the bubonic plague was for the population of Europe. And for the Jewish people in Europe at that time, it was even more terrible because in addition to the disaster of the plague, they also had to overcome the prejudice of their neighbors. So I thought it showed how heroic the Jews were and what survivors in those times. And I thought their story should be told. And another reason why I wrote the book is I was always very interested in why do we love someone? Do we love someone because of the way they look or because of the way they are, because of their inner self? And this story allowed me to explore that topic.
In a fascinating way that we'll talk about in a minute, I enjoyed the fact that you were using alternating voices for the main characters. For our listeners, I should explain that the characters are Natan, a 17-year-old Jewish youth, and Elena, a Christian daughter of the master draper in the town in Strasbourg. Can you tell us a bit about the process of writing in this format, using alternating first-person narratives?
I'm so glad you picked up on that because I just love doing it. And the reason I did it, to be honest with you, is because I have a male and a female character, right? And I'm exploring how they feel about each other when Natan becomes an Ibor. So I thought it would be effective if we would have Elena express her feelings and Natan his feelings. And it was a bit of a challenge because I've never done a double first-person narrative like that before. I kind of like to challenge myself a little bit with each book and try something new. So, you know, it keeps being interesting to me. And yeah, there's a problem because you have to make sure that it's not confusing to your readers. And the two voices have to be different. Also, when we talked about the format of the book, we made sure that when we change narrators, there are Elena stories, there's Natan stories, Elena stories, Natan stories. we did that so that visually the readers, the kids, will be able to tell who's talking. But I'm hoping that the writing is strong enough that they will be able to tell who's talking even without having those dividing pages.
Yeah, it definitely is, although that design feature helps, but the voices are definitely different, and I like the fact that each character, each voice moved the story along. It was a very smooth transition, one to the other, and then back again. So
thank you, Anne.
It worked very well for me. Well, you've mentioned this idea of an Ibur from the Kabbalah. This
Yes.
concept was absolutely new to me. I've heard of a Dibuk, of course, but not an Ibur. Can you explain what that is and why you decided to use it in this novel?
Yes. Most people have heard of the Dibuk, right? As have
Yeah.
I. During my writing, I became interested. I said, if there is an evil spirit like the Dibuk, is there also a good spirit? And guess what? There is, the Ibur, very unknown. When I was doing my research, I approached a Orthodox and a conservative rabbi, and one of them kind of heard about it but didn't really know anything about it. I had to go to the chief rabbi in Winnipeg, Rabbi Altheim of Chabad, and he knew all about it. What it is, it's a Jewish person gets killed. Before he can complete a task of great benefit to the Jewish people, his neshama, his soul, can travel into the body of another person so he's able to complete this task. That's why I made Natan into an Ibur, because in the book, the Jews of Strasbourg are accused of poisoning the wells in the town in order to cause a bubonic plague. Of course, a totally false, ridiculous accusation.
Okay.
And Natan, who falls in love with Elena, which was a relationship frowned upon because she was not Jewish, one night they meet secretly, and when he goes home, in the town square, he comes upon these hooligans, 3 guys who are poisoning the well. He tries to hide, but they catch him, and he tells them to let him go and that he will tell his neighbors, he'll tell the world that it wasn't the Jews who were poisoning the wells, but these hooligans.
Right.
And they kill him. And in order for him to be able to save his fellow Jews, he becomes an Ibur. And the reason I did this because, as I told you, I wanted to explore who do we love. Do we love somebody who is absolutely handsome or somebody who might be not good looking but has a kind heart?
Yes.
And Natan, the Jewish boy, is extremely handsome, but his soul goes into the body of a very plain, not good looking man. And this allowed me to explore this dilemma we face when we choose to love someone or when we fall in love with someone. Sometimes choice doesn't come into it that much.
Right. I really like this device because it had a dual purpose. As you say, one, the theme, whom do we love? And secondly, it allowed the plot to move forward with a lot of conflict.
And also character growth, too.
Yes. Yeah, so it was very effective. So, Eva, I have just a few more questions for you. While you were working on this book, can you tell us about one of your best or your worst experiences? Did something happen that was striking for you, or something that blocked you for a while, or that was a revelation to you?
Well, I love writing. I truly enjoy it, the whole process. But I have to tell you, this one, because of its sort of paranormal aspects, it was so much fun. I just loved doing it because things not bound by earthly rules came into play. I sort of felt I wasn't really bound by any rules either. So I just really, really enjoyed writing this book. And it came very easily. I was quite surprised how easily it came, because we all have parts of the book where we say, oh my goodness, how am I going to solve this problem? What am I going to do next? But it didn't happen with this one. This one just kind of flew out of me. And I also loved, despite my inexperience at it really, loved writing the love scene, about the passion they have for each other. I myself, even as I was writing it, moved myself, which is pretty good for an author to feel.
That's right. If you can bring yourself to tears or to joy, then you've accomplished something.
for sure.
Eva, would you like to share with our listeners what you're working on now, or are you taking a break from writing?
No, I actually have a very exciting new project, which is quite different from anything I have done before. I told you I used to be a journalist after I graduated from university. And this is a little bit returning to my roots, and it took me away from young adult writing. I was commissioned by the Jewish Heritage Center of Western Canada to write the history of the Jewish doctors in Manitoba over the last 100 years. So I'm deep in research of how the Jewish doctors in Manitoba contributed to the province over the last 100 years, and it's a very exciting story. There was a lot of anti-Semitism, there were a lot of tremendous contributions and a lot of fascinating personalities. And this, I think, is a bit of a change for now, and it's a 2-year project, and as soon as it's done, I already have the notes for another young adult novel, so I'll be returning to that.
Oh, that's very exciting. Eva, is there any question you wish I'd asked and didn't? Is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners?
I think you were so thorough, Anne. I really can't think of anything. This is about the best interview I ever had. Thank you so much.
Oh, my goodness. Thank you. Eva Wiesner, thank you for telling us so much about your writing life. May you continue to tell these difficult stories with skill and compassion.
Thank you.
This is Anne Dublin signing off in Toronto. Thank you, Eva.
If you enjoy the Book of Life podcast, please become a patron at patreon.com/bookoflife. Leave a review on iTunes or a comment on our blog at bookoflifepodcast.com. You can also like our page at facebook.com/bookoflifepodcast. Follow us at twitter.com/bookoflifepod. Email us at bookoflifepodcast@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 561-206-2473. The Book of Life is a podcast service of the Feldman Library at Congregation B'nai Israel in Boca Raton, Florida at cbiboca.org and is supported in part by the Association of Jewish Libraries at jewishlibraries.org. Our background music is provided by the Freilach Makers Klezmer String Band. Thanks for listening and happy reading.